The Pink Dress, March 14th, 2024. The demolition crew knew something was wrong before Miguel Santos even called his supervisor. The hollow thunk of the sledgehammer against that section of interior wall on the second floor of the abandoned Riverside textile factory didn't match the solid percussion of the previous hour. Miguel had been swinging a hammer for 23 years. He knew the difference. He set down the tool and studied the 2-foot gap that had opened up. Inside, darkness and something pink. It was a prom dress, 1980s style, puffy sleeves, layers of tulle, pale pink satin now stiff and yellowed with age. Dark brown stains covered the bodice. Marcus Chen, the demolition supervisor, pulled on latex gloves from the first aid kit in his truck and examined it carefully. The stains had that particular rust-colored quality that made his stomach tighten. Inside the hem, someone had sewn letters with dark thread. The stitching was crude, desperate, the letters uneven and small. Jennifer Miller. Help me. Ross did this. Marcus called 911 at 2:47 p.m. By 3:15, Detective Sarah Chen from the Springfield Police Department was standing in the cavernous factory, photographing a dress that had been sealed behind drywall for 39 years. The medical examiner would later confirm that the brown stains were human blood, type O positive, approximately 35 to 40 years old. But Sarah didn't need forensics to understand what she was looking at. Someone had hidden this dress deliberately. Someone had sealed Jennifer Miller behind a wall and left her there to be discovered by chance and demolition. The question wasn't whether Jennifer Miller was dead. The question was, who put her there? Springfield, Ohio, had been Jennifer Miller's entire world for 17 years. Population 45,000, the kind of Midwestern town where everyone knew everyone, or at least knew someone who did. Jennifer lived on Maple Street, 3 blocks from the high school. Her father was a banker. Her mother taught 3rd grade. She had a younger brother, Tyler, 13 years old, and the annoying kind that followed her everywhere. She was pretty without being stunning, smart without being intimidating, kind to people nobody else bothered with. She'd been dating David Ross for 2 years, since sophomore year. They'd met in chemistry class and had been inseparable ever since. Her best friend Lisa said it was the real thing, not like the other girls' boyfriends who dumped them within a month. David looks at you like you're the only person in the room, Lisa said once. Jennifer believed it. She'd spent 2 years building a future with David. They'd talked about colleges. She wanted Ohio State to study education. He wanted to stay close by, maybe Ohio University or Ohio Northern. After college, they'd figure it out, but they'd figure it out together. She was certain of this, with the kind of certainty only 17-year-olds can muster. What she didn't know was that David had never mentioned her to his father, not once. Frank Ross was a shift supervisor at Riverside Textile, a job he'd held for 18 years. Before that, he'd been a drinker, the kind of drinker who lost jobs and lost money and nearly lost his family. But Riverside had given him structure. The night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., suited him. The routine was rigid and uncomplicated. He managed 40 employees, dealt with production quotas and maintenance schedules, and left his personal problems at the door. For 15 years, he'd been sober. His wife had stopped flinching when he came home. His son had learned to walk without tiptoeing. Frank Ross was also a man who needed to control everything in his orbit. What his wife cooked, what his son wore, who his son's friends were. He didn't approve of dating at David's age. He believed girls were distractions from studies and ambition. He'd made this clear to David in 1983 when David first mentioned a girl. David had learned to simply not mention it. May 18th, 1985 was the night of the junior-senior prom. David picked Jennifer up at 6 p.m. She wore the pink dress her mother had been saving for since January. It had cost $140, an enormous amount of money in 1985. The dress had arrived in a white box from a boutique in nearby Dayton. Jennifer had tried it on in the store under lights that made everything shimmer. Her mother had cried. This was the dress. David wore a rented tuxedo and a pale blue bow tie. His palms were sweating when Jennifer opened her front door. She looked like a princess from a movie he couldn't afford to see. Her mother took a dozen photographs in the front yard, while Jennifer's father pretended not to be emotional, and Tyler made gagging sounds from the porch. The prom was held in the high school gymnasium, decorated with paper streamers and a rented disco ball. They danced for hours. They won best couple. They felt like they were winning something larger than a school prize. They felt like they were winning at life. It ended at 11:30 p.m. when the DJ announced the last song. "Come with me," David said in the parking lot, not quite meeting her eyes. "Where?" "I want you to meet my father." Jennifer felt something cold move through her chest. "Now?" "David, it's 11:30 at night." "I know, but he's at work, at the factory. I want to introduce you before college, before everything changes. I need you to know my family. I need him to understand how important you are." What Jennifer didn't know was that this was the culmination of David's own internal debate spanning 2 years. He'd spent months convinced that if his father just met Jennifer, if he understood who she really was, he'd see that David wasn't making a mistake. He'd see that Jennifer was worth the distraction. Maybe he'd even be proud. It was the kind of magical thinking that 18-year-old boys engage in when they're exhausted and in love, and desperate to bridge the gap between their two worlds. "Is this a good idea?" Jennifer asked. "Trust me," David said. She did. So she got in the car with him, instead of going to Kevin Marshall's after-party where everyone else was going. Instead of spending the night celebrating with her friends. Instead of writing her name in the yearbook and dancing to one more song. She got in David's 1982 Chevy Citation, her pink dress spreading across the passenger seat like a flag of surrender, and drove to Riverside Textile. The factory was a 5-story brick structure built in 1922, expanded throughout the 60s and 70s, gradually hollowed out by the early 80s. By May 1985, Riverside was struggling. Cheaper imports had started undercutting their prices. Management was talking about downsizing. But the night shift still ran, about 30 people spread across 5 production lines, manufacturing clothes that would be shipped to department stores across Ohio and Kentucky. The lobby was empty when David and Jennifer walked in at midnight. The security guard, a man named Pete, who'd worked there for 6 years, was on his rounds on the 3rd floor. David knew this. He'd visited his father at work a dozen times over the years, always during the same window of time. He knew the guard's schedule. The production floor on the 2nd level was loud with machinery, the sound of the night shift running. David led Jennifer past the main lines, where workers in blue uniforms barely glanced up as they passed. They were headed to the supervisor's office, a glass-walled room that overlooked the floor. Frank Ross was 47 years old, 6 feet tall, with the kind of hardened face that came from too many cigarettes and too much responsibility. He was doing paperwork when his son walked in with a girl wearing a pink prom dress. The look that crossed his face, something between confusion and rage, happened so quickly that Jennifer almost missed it. Then it was gone, replaced by something controlled and careful. Controlled people are often more frightening than angry ones. "What are you doing here?" His voice was flat. "Dad, this is Jennifer Miller. Jennifer, this is my father, Frank Ross." Jennifer smiled and extended her hand. "Mr. Ross, it's such an honor to finally meet you. David talks about you all the—" "Get out of my factory," Frank said. He didn't take her hand. He stood up, and David could see his hands were trembling slightly. "Both of you. Out. Now." "Dad, I'm not discussing this. You don't bring girls to my workplace. You don't show up in the middle of the night. Who the hell gave you permission to be here?" Jennifer's smile died. She looked at David, confused. David felt the plan he'd been constructing for months dissolve like sugar in water. "I just wanted you to meet her," David said quietly. I don't care what you wanted. This is unprofessional, and it's disrespectful to me and to this company." Frank's voice wasn't raised, which was somehow worse. "And you—" He looked at Jennifer with something like contempt. "You should know better than to encourage this kind of behavior. Girls who sneak around at night, who convince boys to disobey their parents, they don't turn into good women." Jennifer felt her face burn. "I'm sorry. We should go." "Yes," Frank agreed. "You should." David grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the office. They practically ran down the stairs, out through the lobby, into the parking lot. He could feel her trembling as they got into the car. "I'm so sorry," David kept saying. "I'm so sorry. He's not like this usually. He's protective. He doesn't like surprises. David, we should go. Just take me home." He drove her home in silence. She looked out the window the entire time, her chin tight. When he pulled up to her house at 12:35 a.m., she didn't kiss him goodbye. She just grabbed her small purse from the floorboard, opened the door, and paused. "That was humiliating," she said quietly. "Your father just told me I was a bad person, in front of you, and you didn't say anything. I'm sorry. I'll talk to him. I'll make this right. Don't bother." She got out of the car. I need to think about some things." He watched her walk up the sidewalk to her front door. She went inside without looking back. He sat in the car for 5 minutes, watching her porch light, trying to figure out what had gone so catastrophically wrong. At 1 a.m., the telephone rang in the factory supervisor's office. The night shift secretary, a woman named Dorothy who worked at the main desk, answered it. "Riverside Textile, this is Dorothy speaking. Is Mr. Frank Ross available? May I ask who's calling? This is Jennifer Miller. It's important." Dorothy had worked at Riverside for 4 years. She knew Frank Ross. She knew he was in his office doing end-of-shift paperwork. She didn't think twice about transferring the call. A girl calling at this hour was unusual, but teenagers did strange things. She transferred it through. Frank picked up on the second ring. "Yes? Mr. Ross? This is Jennifer Miller. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to talk to you about what happened earlier. I don't think you understand what David and I mean to each other." Frank was quiet for a long moment. "How did you get this number?" "It's in the phone book, under Riverside Textile. I didn't mean to bother you while you're working, but Meet me at the factory," he said. "Come to the front entrance. I need to speak with you in person." "Now?" "Mr. Ross, it's after 1 in the morning. If you want me to listen to what you have to say, you'll come now. Otherwise, I suggest you stop calling my workplace." He hung up. Jennifer sat on her bed, still wearing her pink prom dress. Her mother was asleep. Her father was asleep. Tyler was asleep. She was the only one awake in the dark house, holding a telephone receiver and wondering what she'd just done. She'd been angry at David, humiliated by his father, determined to fix it. She'd thought if she could just talk to Frank Ross, if she could explain that she loved his son and that she wasn't the person he'd described, then maybe everything would make sense. She was 17 years old. She believed in the power of honesty and good intentions. She believed that if she was sincere enough, if she showed enough respect and humility, adults would listen. She got back in her car, a 1980 Honda Civic her parents had given her for her 16th birthday, and drove back to Riverside Textile. It was 1:15 a.m. Frank Ross sat in his office and waited. He wasn't calm, despite how calm he looked. His mind was moving through scenarios, through options, through the particular kind of rage that surfaces when someone disrespects you in your own domain. The girl had called his workplace. She'd gotten his number from a phone book. She'd ignored his dismissal and pursued him. His son had brought her to his factory in the middle of the night. His control was slipping. He could feel it. When Jennifer arrived at 1:25 a.m., Pete, the security guard, was in the third-floor bathroom. Frank knew this. He always knew where Pete was during the night shift. He'd memorized his schedule long ago. He met Jennifer at the main entrance and brought her upstairs to the second floor. Not to his office this time, but to a different corridor, an old section of the factory that had been closed off since the early 70s, when Riverside consolidated its operations. The hallway smelled like machine oil and dust. The lights were fluorescent and harsh. "What do you want?" Frank asked. "I just want to explain," Jennifer said. Her voice was smaller in this hallway. "I'm not trying to interfere in your family. I love David. We want to get married someday. I know that seems young to you, but we're serious. We're going to college. We're going to build a life together. And I think you should support that, instead of making him choose between—" "You're a distraction," Frank said flatly. "You're exactly what I told my son you'd be, a distraction from his future. That's not fair. You don't even know me. I know all I need to know. I know you sneak around with my son. I know you convinced him to bring you to my workplace. I know you just called my factory at 1 a.m. That's not the behavior of a good girl." Jennifer felt tears start to form. "You're being unfair. Get out of my factory." "No," Jennifer said. And then, with the particular courage or stupidity of youth, "You're wrong about me. You're wrong about David. And I'm going to make sure he knows that you're trying to keep him from being happy." Frank took a step toward her. "What did you just say?" "I said you're wrong. I'm going to tell him what you said to me. I'm going to tell him how cruel you are. And then I'm going to call my father. And my father is going to call the police and tell them that you threatened me." "I didn't threaten you. You're threatening me right now. You're in a dark hallway, telling me to leave, telling me I'm a bad person. If anything happens to me, people know I came here. My parents know I came here." This was a lie. No one knew. But she said it anyway. Frank's hand moved faster than thought. He grabbed her arm, not gently, but not violently either, more like a teacher pulling a misbehaving student toward the principal's office. Jennifer pulled back, startled. The hallway was narrow, and she wasn't expecting to resist. Her heel caught on the floor. She fell backward, away from him, her body rotating as she tried to catch herself. Her head hit the corner of a metal shelving unit that was bolted to the wall. The sound was distinct, a sharp crack, followed by a different quality of silence. Jennifer slumped to the floor, blood immediately beginning to pool around her head. Frank stood over her, his breathing ragged, his hand still extended where he'd been holding her arm. "Jennifer!" He knelt down. "Jennifer!" She was unconscious. Her pulse was there when he checked her neck, but it was weak and getting weaker. He could see the bone of her skull was fractured. There was an indentation where her head had struck the shelf corner. Frank Ross had killed people before, not literally, but metaphorically. He'd destroyed careers and relationships and childhoods through the force of his will and his contempt. But he'd never killed anyone with his hands. He stood up and stepped back and thought very clearly. This was an accident. She fell. I can prove she fell. This changes nothing, except everything had changed. He went to his office and sat in his chair for exactly 3 minutes. Then he picked up the phone and dialed his son's house. His wife answered. "David needs to come to the factory," Frank said. "Tell him I called. Tell him to come now and not to tell you where he's going." David was still awake, lying in his bed in the dark, when his mother knocked on his door. "Your father called. He wants you at the factory." "Now? Why?" "He didn't say. He said not to tell me where you're going." David's stomach clenched. His father never called the house. His father was in bed before midnight, at work by 9:45 p.m. Something was wrong. He drove to Riverside Textile with a sickness rising in his chest. It was 1:42 a.m. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars belonging to the maintenance crew and office staff. His father was waiting in the lobby. "Upstairs," Frank said. "Second floor, the old section." David followed him up the stairs, and then he saw Jennifer. She was on the floor of the hallway, surrounded by blood. Her head was at an angle that looked wrong. Her eyes were open, but unseeing. The pink prom dress was soaked dark. What happened? David's voice didn't sound like his voice. She fell, Frank said. She came back here. I don't know why. She called the factory and asked me to meet her. When I met her, she was hysterical. She said she was going to call the police, said I'd threatened her. I tried to calm her down. She tried to run away. She slipped, hit her head on the shelf. David stared at his girlfriend's body on the dirty floor, at the blood, at the hair matted with blood. He thought he might vomit. She's gone? He whispered. Yes. You killed her. It was an accident. But it doesn't matter what happened. What matters is what happens next. Listen to me, David. Listen very carefully. David looked at his father. You brought her here earlier. Multiple people saw you. They saw her. They saw her in a prom dress. They saw you arguing with me. They heard you say we disagreed about her. Your fingerprints are all over my office. Your DNA is on her body. You held her. You touched her. Your car was parked in the visitor lot. Even if you tell the police exactly what I'm telling you right now, they'll suspect you. They'll investigate you. At minimum, you'll be interviewed. Your life will be questioned. Worst case, they'll charge you as an accomplice. We have to call the police. And say what? That she came back here at 1 in the morning? That I met her in this hallway? That she fell and died? Do you think that sounds believable? Or do you think it sounds like a cover story? Like two men decided to murder a girl and came up with a story? You're saying... I'm saying we have maybe 2 hours before the shift supervisor comes through this hallway for end-of-shift inspection. I'm saying we can handle this ourselves, or we can destroy our lives. Those are the only two options. David looked at Jennifer's body again. He thought about her mother. He thought about Tyler. He thought about the photo her mother had taken in the yard. Jennifer smiling in her pink dress, her whole future ahead of her. What do we do? He heard himself ask. They worked in silence for 47 minutes. Frank had been thinking about this since the moment Jennifer's head hit the shelf. He'd already decided where to put her. The old section of the factory had been scheduled for a renovation next month. Someone had decided to modernize the space, add better lighting, clean it up. The framing materials were stored in a large room on the second floor. The interior walls hadn't been built yet. There was one section where a wall would be constructed next week. No one would notice if the construction started a day early. They placed Jennifer in a heavy plastic tarp, the kind used for drop cloths during maintenance. They carried her to the construction site. Frank had already brought in framing materials. They placed her body upright in the cavity where the new wall would go, braced it with wooden supports so it wouldn't fall, and then began nailing up drywall. As they worked, David noticed something that his brain struggled to process. His father hummed. Very quietly, a melody that might have been a song from a radio station, or might have been nothing at all. He hummed while sealing his daughter-in-law to be behind a wall. At 2:45 a.m., the wall was closed. They taped the seams and applied compound over the nail heads. By 3:15, it looked like a normal wall in a normal room in an old factory. Someone would paint it next week. Someone would eventually notice it was there, but they wouldn't know what was inside. Frank walked David to his car. You go home. You get in bed. Tomorrow you act normal. If the police come, and they will come, you tell them the truth. You drop Jennifer off at home at 12:30 a.m. She went inside. You never saw her again. You understand? Yes. And David, if you ever tell anyone about tonight, I'll tell the police that you killed her, that you were angry because she said she wanted to break up, that you brought her here and hit her head. I'll say I came down and found you with the body. Your DNA is on her. Your car was here. Your prints are in my office. Without a confession, my story is more believable than yours. You understand? David understood. His father had just explained that he was trapped, that they were trapped together, that his father had committed a murder and had carefully constructed a prison for his son out of logic and evidence and leverage. "Yes," David said. "I understand." He drove home as the sun began to lighten the eastern sky. He showered and burned his clothes in the backyard fire pit while his mother slept. He got into bed at 5:47 a.m. and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. In his mind, the image of Jennifer's body on the factory floor played on repeat. The police arrived at David's house at noon on May 20th, 1985. Jennifer's mother had called them that morning. Jennifer hadn't come home. No one had seen her since the prom. Carol Miller had filed a missing persons report and given them David's name as the last person to see her daughter alive. Detective Raymond Walsh, who'd been with the Springfield police for 22 years, was relatively gentle with David. He asked him questions in the living room while David's mother sat nearby, confused and frightened. David told him the truth. He'd picked up Jennifer at the prom at 11:30 p.m. They'd driven to his father's factory to introduce Jennifer to his father. The meeting hadn't gone well. He'd driven Jennifer home at 12:35 a.m. She'd gotten out of the car and gone inside. He'd never seen her again. "Why did you take her to your father's factory?" Detective Walsh asked. "I wanted them to meet. I thought if he understood how important she was to me, he'd be happy for us." "And he wasn't?" "He was upset that I'd brought her to his workplace. He sent us away." Detective Walsh asked him about their relationship, about whether they'd been fighting, about Jennifer's mood. David answered everything honestly, which made his answers sound true, because most of them were. A polygraph test was administered 2 weeks later. David's results were inconclusive. The examiner noted physiological stress responses consistent with both truth and deception. Detective Walsh suspected David knew more than he was saying, but suspicion isn't evidence, and Carol Miller's grief was beginning to give way to a terrible kind of resignation. Jennifer was gone. Whether she'd run away or been taken or died, she was gone. And there was nothing David Ross could tell them that would bring her back. After 3 months, the case went cold. David Ross went to Ohio State in the fall of 1985. He changed his major 3 times, drank too much beer and too much whiskey, got a DUI his junior year. He came back to Springfield after 2 years and enrolled in community college to finish his degree in accounting. He met Patricia Thompson at an Applebee's, where she was working as a waitress. She was sweet and uncomplicated, and she didn't ask too many questions about his past. They got married in 1996. They had 2 children. They built a life that looked normal from the outside. A house in the suburbs, a stable job, friends and family and holiday gatherings. But every night, David dreamed about a pink prom dress. Every time he saw a girl with dark hair, his stomach tightened. Every time someone mentioned Springfield High School, he thought about Jennifer Miller's mother. He wondered if she'd ever forgiven him for whatever role she thought he'd played in her daughter's disappearance. In 2018, Frank Ross died of lung cancer. David didn't go to the funeral. Patricia was hurt and confused by this, but David couldn't explain it. He couldn't tell her that his father was a murderer, that they'd been complicit together, that they'd hidden a body behind a wall and built their lives on top of a grave. When Riverside Textile was shut down and scheduled for demolition in 2024, David had a panic attack. He sat in his car outside the factory and hyperventilated for 20 minutes, because he knew with absolute certainty that they would find her. 39 years was a long time to keep a secret, but it was also a very short time for a wall to hold. Detective Sarah Chen sat in the interrogation room across from David Ross on March 16, 2024, and listened to him confess to accessory, after the fact, to murder. "I was 18 years old," David said at one point. "My father had just committed a murder, and then explained to me, very logically, how I would go to prison if I told the truth. He showed me the evidence, my fingerprints, my DNA, my car, my argument with him, All of it looked like I'd done something terrible. And then he told me that if I ever told anyone the truth, he'd blame me. He'd say I killed her, and he came down and found me with the body. "Why didn't you tell someone?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because I believed him. Because I was terrified. Because once I helped hide her body, I became guilty too. I couldn't go to the police without destroying my own life, and I couldn't live with the guilt, so I drank it away. I married someone who wouldn't ask questions. I had kids. I built a wall of normalcy on top of another wall, and I lived inside that wall for 39 years. He paused. "The worst part is, I wasn't even entirely blameless. I brought her there. I introduced them. I humiliated her in front of his office to prove a point about my own independence. If I hadn't done that, if I'd just trusted that she'd understand my father wasn't worth knowing, she'd still be alive. My father would probably be alive too. He died alone because his son couldn't forgive him, not because he'd killed someone, but because he'd trapped his son with him." Sarah didn't say anything to this. There was nothing to say. The case had shifted the moment she'd found the dress. It wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a tragedy. It was a carefully hidden tragedy that had metastasized for nearly 4 decades into the lives of everyone connected to it. The forensic evidence was conclusive. The blood on the dress matched the blood found on the shelving unit in the old factory. The DNA matched Jennifer Miller's remains. The message sewn into the hem, "Jennifer Miller, help me." Ross did this, was written with thread that had been stained by her own blood. The medical examiner determined that Jennifer had sutured the message into her dress after the initial injury. She'd broken fingers on her right hand, suggesting she'd tried to crawl, tried to get away. She'd survived long enough to know she was dying, long enough to decide that her death would be documented, long enough to sew the truth into the fabric of her dress. She was determined to tell us what happened, the medical examiner said to Sarah. Even dying, even alone in that hallway, she decided we would know. That's extraordinary. The trial happened in June 2024. David Ross pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact to murder and obstruction of justice spanning 39 years. The prosecution argued for 15 to 20 years. The defense argued that David had been a child, 18 years old, manipulated and threatened by his father, terrified of going to prison himself. The judge sentenced David to 12 years, with the possibility of parole after 8. Jennifer Miller was buried on July 3, 2024, in Springfield Memorial Cemetery, in a plot next to her mother, who had died in 2003, still wondering what happened to her daughter. Her headstone read simply, Jennifer Marie Miller, 1967-1985, forever 17. Tyler Miller stood at the grave after everyone else had left. He was 52 years old, a high school principal, a man who'd spent his entire adult life wondering if his sister had suffered. Now he knew she had. "I'm sorry, Jen," he said quietly to the stone. "I'm sorry it took so long." There is a temptation, in stories like this, to find redemption, to suggest that David's suffering balanced out his complicity, that his confession balanced out the decades of silence. But redemption is not always possible. Some sins, even when confessed, even when punished, leave permanent marks. David Ross is currently serving his sentence in Lucasville Correctional Institution. His wife divorced him in 2025. His children, now adults, have not visited him. Patricia married someone else, a man she met through a grief support group, another person who'd lost something significant to time. She still questions whether she should have known, should have seen the weight David carried every day of their marriage. But there are certain kinds of guilt that hide well, and certain kinds of secrets that are too heavy to accidentally drop. The pink dress is in a museum now, donated by the Springfield Police Department to an exhibit on cold cases and the evolution of forensic technology. Thousands of people walk past it every year. Some pause and read the story card. Some notice the message sewn into the hem. Jennifer Miller. Help me. Ross did this. Most people walk past without stopping, but every person who reads that message understands something essential about truth. It cannot be killed. It can be hidden. It can be delayed. It can be sealed behind walls for 39 years. But eventually, it emerges. Eventually, it always emerges.